Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah agreed to a U.S.-brokered proposal, setting the stage to end nearly 14 months of fighting. The Biden administration now hopes this agreement could provide momentum and renew efforts to end the war in Gaza.
Have some good news to report from the Middle East.
It will make a big difference in saving lives and livelihoods in Lebanon and in Israel.
The conditions are that Hezbollah has to pull back, and then Israel is also supposed to pull back. But the danger is, will Hezbollah do that?
Trump is threatening to impose a 25% tariff on all imports from Mexico and Canada, plus a 10% tariff on goods from China.
President-elect Trump has said that these tariffs may be a negotiation tactic, and we will have to see if these do go into effect on day one.
AAA expects Thanksgiving travel to set new records, with nearly 72 million Americans expected to take a road trip.
The TSA expects to screen more than 2.8 million people.
The Biden administration is proposing a new rule that would give millions of Americans with obesity access to weight loss drugs.
The reason they're doing this change now is because doctors' groups are increasingly recognizing obesity as a disease.
Thank you for joining us. We begin our report with a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Lebanon's Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah after more than a year of fighting. President Biden said Tuesday both sides have accepted a U.S.-backed deal, which will be implemented with the help of France.
This has been the deadliest conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in decades. Lasting security for the people of Israel and Lebanon cannot be achieved only on the battlefield. And that's why I directed my team to work with the governments of Israel and Lebanon to forge a ceasefire, to bring the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah to a close.
A full and permanent ceasefire will go into effect early Wednesday morning local time. The Israeli military will have 60 days to complete a gradual withdrawal from Lebanon. The first round of troops to leave the country will start within the next 10 days. Hezbollah is expected to withdraw its forces and weapons about 20 miles back from the Israeli border. Just hours before the ceasefire deal was announced, Israel and Hezbollah were still exchanging rocket fire. The Lebanese health ministry says 55 people were killed by Israeli airstrikes in southern Beirut Tuesday, while Hezbollah strikes in northern Israel triggered air raid sirens. Lebanon's health ministry says nearly 4,000 people have been killed since the war between Israel and Hezbollah began. About 16,000 others have been wounded. CBS News foreign correspondent Deborah Patta has the latest from East Jerusalem. Deborah?
The ceasefire has been approved by Israel's cabinet, but Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel retains the right to strike back if Hezbollah violates the agreement and tries to rearm. The ceasefire will last 60 days, during which Israel will withdraw from Lebanon and Hezbollah will retreat north of the Litani River, with Lebanese troops and UN soldiers keeping the peace. The implementation of the deal will be monitored by a five-nation committee, including the U.S. and France. Just today, Israel hit 20 sites in Beirut in the space of just 2 minutes, aiming to inflict maximum punishment in the final hours before the ceasefire takes hold. And sirens sounded across northern Israel as Hezbollah launched many rocket attacks. Most were intercepted. The two sides have been trading fire for over a year, but it exploded into all-out war over 2 months ago. More than 3,750 people have been killed in Lebanon, over 100 in Israel. And for those caught up in this war, a ceasefire cannot come soon enough. Back to you.
Deborah Patta in East Jerusalem, thank you. For more, let's bring in CBS News contributor Andrew Boyd. He's the former chief of operations from the CIA's Counterterrorism Mission Center. Andrew, if you can, peel back the curtain for us. How is a deal like this brokered?
Good evening, Lindsay. Well, I mean, with a lot of involvement from the Biden administration and with separate dialogue between the United States government and Israel about that right to strike back against Hezbollah if they violate the tenets of the truce. But the basic guidelines for this ceasefire, this truce, is UN Resolution 1701, because Hezbollah, which was drafted after the 2006 war but never really adhered to, Hezbollah has to withdraw north of the Litani River 20 miles north of the Israeli border, which takes it out of the range of being a direct threat to the citizens of northern Israel. But the key, as your correspondent just noted, is that Hezbollah has to actually adhere to this agreement, and we'll see over the next 60 days if that is what they decide to do.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Tuesday there are three main reasons why he wants a ceasefire with Hezbollah in Lebanon: to be able to focus on Iran, give their forces a break, and to isolate Hamas. Does Israel feel it's completed its intended goals against Hezbollah? And what does it say that their troops and arms need replenishing?
So, I mean, I think any army with limited capacity needs to replenish their arms. So that is a good statement. It's an important political statement for Prime Minister Netanyahu. But they have achieved their goals. I mean, this is a truce. This is a ceasefire. It's an important step for the innocent civilians in Lebanon and Israel. It's an important step so that Israeli citizens can move back to northern Israel to their homes. But I really hesitate to really call it a truce or a ceasefire. This is Hezbollah surrendering. They have been defeated. They are no longer militarily relevant. They have a terrorism arm that can conduct operations outside of the Lebanese-Israeli border area, and so we all have to be worried about that. And they also their sponsors in Iran may have something to say about terrorist operations. But as far as a military force, and frankly, in a lot of ways, a political force in Lebanon, they have been defeated. And this is Hezbollah surrendering. Their leadership has been decimated. Many of their fighters have been killed. And we'll just see if the 60-day agreement holds. But if it does, I think we're going to see Hezbollah return to focusing on social services, education, to remain relevant in Lebanese politics.
Could this have any effect on the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas?
I mean, it could. The Iranians tried to link the two. They're two very different, very distinct groups with very distinct goals. Unfortunately, Hassan Nasrallah, unfortunate for him, he linked Hezbollah's future on October 8th after the Hamas attacks on October 7th to Hamas, wherein Hezbollah would continue to fire rockets and missiles at Israel until there was a ceasefire with Hamas. And that led to the demise of not only Hassan Nasrallah, but the entire leadership of Hezbollah.
Andrew Boyd, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lindsay.
President-elect Donald Trump says he will impose widespread tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, and China. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform Monday, quote, "On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States." He goes on to say, quote, "This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and an illegal alien stop this invasion of our country." Trump also says he will impose an additional 10% tariff on imports from China. The U.S. currently imposes a range of tariffs on Chinese goods, including a 100% tariff on electric vehicles and a 50% tariff on semiconductors. Tariffs are paid by U.S. companies that purchase imported goods. Economists warn tariffs could lead to higher prices because those companies are likely to pass on additional costs to consumers. A recent CBS News poll found 52% of Americans are in favor of tariffs, while 48% oppose. Among only Trump voters, favorability shoots up to 83%. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Nicole, Trump campaigned on lowering inflation, but many economists say tariffs will raise prices. How is the Trump team responding to those concerns?
Well, on the campaign trail, President-elect Donald Trump often scoffed at the idea that, this could negatively impact the economy. I don't know if you remember, but he did a pretty extensive interview with the Economic Club of Chicago where he was questioned about how this would all work. And, part of the point he made at that point in time is, that he kind of wants to incentivize companies to set up their headquarters here in the United States instead of having all of these overseas, bases of operation, which he says would therefore mean that these companies would not face tariffs. So that's one part of the argument. The other part is that if you look at his Truth Social post from last night, in essence, he said that part of the reason he wants to put pressure on these countries is he really wants to stop the flow of migrants coming into this country, even though border apprehensions are down, yes, but we know that that was something that he campaigned extensively on in terms of border security and strengthening the U.S.-Mexico border. And secondly, he also expressed concern about drugs coming into the country, particularly fentanyl. So that was part of the rationale behind imposing this 10% tariff on China. And he says basically until those issues are resolved, those tariffs would likely remain.
Nicole, how have leaders of Mexico, China, and Canada reacted to this announcement?
Well, certainly it's been a pretty mixed response from these countries, all of them really trying to encourage some dialogue around this issue. You know, we heard from Mexico's president this morning, who sent a letter to the president-elect and who expressed concerns that this could potentially start kind of a tit-for-tat dynamic. And keep in mind, you know, Mexico is one of the U.S.'s largest trading partners. In fact, all of these countries are, you know, in the top three. So this does have ramifications for all of them. In terms of Canada, we heard from Prime Minister Trudeau, who said that he had a call with President-elect Trump last night. The Trump transition didn't comment on that call, but Trudeau did and said, you know, look, you know, we kind of had a very candid discussion about, you know, what's at stake here, and that he does intend to meet with some of his premiers later this week, but, you know, really tried to stress the importance of the potential impact that these tariffs could have. And then lastly, of course, with respect to China, a Chinese embassy official said that it really doesn't benefit anybody to have a trade war or a tariff war.
Remind us, how has President Biden used tariffs during his tenure?
Well, interestingly, this is kind of an area where both leaders are somewhat aligned. I mean, you know, President Biden didn't necessarily roll back all of Trump's tariffs from his first time in office, and even increase some tariffs, particularly on China with respect to electric vehicles. So this is certainly a tactic that we are seeing some support from not only President Biden, but of course President-elect Trump, although certainly some Biden advisors have warned also, just like many economists out there, about the potential impact that these tariffs could have if they move forward.
Nicole Killian, thank you. For a deeper dive on how Trump's proposed tariffs could affect consumers, CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady joins us now. Kelly, this is becoming a nightly thing. We love having you. Can you give us a sense, though, of how much of our goods we get from these three countries?
So, look, Nicole just said it, right? These are three of our biggest trading partners. And in 2023 alone, across all three, we imported 1.3 trillion goods, right? That is a huge amount. So we are very much reliant on Mexico, China, and Canada for the goods that we import into this country. That being said, they are just as reliant on us, potentially even more. And that's where this point around leverage and negotiation comes into play. Canada and Mexico, 80% of the goods that they produce, right, they're exporting to us. And so we're a huge buyer of that.
And so is there an idea that there's going to be a tit for tat? If you tariff our imports, we're going to tariff yours?
Well, and that's the concern, this trade war idea. I will highlight, though, the timing of this is interesting. So, of course, Nicole mentioned the fentanyl piece, the immigration piece. There's also a key deal that is up for review, the USMCA. That's up for review in July of 2026. That replaced NAFTA. That's an agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And Trump has said that he wants to renegotiate that. So, of course, you've heard these leaders come out and say this would be a bad idea, but you also said they're willing to come to the table.
Once these tariffs kick in, if they kick in, how long until consumers notice a change? Higher prices, for example?
Really depends on the product. You know, for some of these agricultural products, it could take a while to flow through the supply chain. And by the way, just because you get a 25% tariff doesn't mean you are going to see a full 25% increase. The different suppliers, different pieces in the supply chain, they would have to negotiate and figure out how much are they going to take versus pass on. Some analysts say, though, that the full impact could be 6 to 9 months for the consumer.
What products will most likely see an increase?
A lot. Okay. So, right, your iPhone, a lot of that's coming from China, your electronics, Mexico, Corona, maybe if you like that, right? Your alcoholic beverages, also plastics, big input in a lot of the things that we have. Canada, lumber, aluminum. I mean, really, I went to a hardware store today to talk to a small business owner. She's like, 95% of my stuff is imported. I would have to raise all of my costs here, and that would be really tough.
Okay. Kelly O'Grady, thanks for sharing that with us. Appreciate it. A federal appeals court has agreed to dismiss the classified documents case against President-elect Donald Trump. Special counsel Jack Smith filed Monday to have the case dismissed, as well as his 2020 election interference case. He cited Trump's re-election and a DOJ policy that sitting presidents can't be prosecuted or indicted. In the documents case, you'll recall the incoming president was charged with allegedly leaving top-secret documents unsecured around his Florida estate after his first presidency. Smith plans to continue with his appeal of a previous dismissal in that case in order to prosecute Trump's two co-defendants, Walt Nauta and Carlos de Oliveira. The Thanksgiving holiday travel season is in full swing in airports throughout the country. TSA is expecting to screen more than 2.8 million people Tuesday, around 300,000 more than the day prior. Between Tuesday and next Monday, TSA is projecting to screen 18.3 million people at airports across the U.S. That would mark a 6% increase from the same time last year. CBS News senior transportation correspondent Chris Van Cleve is following things for us at LaGuardia Airport in Queens, New York. Chris, I love that you're sort of just doing a tour of New York area airports. How are the airports and airlines handling everything so far?
Well, we've been at this one for 14 hours today, so I can tell you we've seen the ebb and flow of people as the peaks and valleys of the flight schedules come and go. The airlines, have been dealing with storms on both coasts and today in the middle of the country, basically since Friday when this travel surge started. And despite that, we've seen cancellations stay very low. So overall, the airlines have operated very well. There have been thousands of delayed flights. Many of those are due to weather. Some of them in the New York City area are due to air traffic control staffing, particularly at Newark Airport. And that has sparked United actually sort of put the FAA on blast earlier today, pushing out a bunch of figures about hundreds of thousands of passengers being disrupted because of staffing delays or longer trips, the ripple effect of the staffing problems that have been going on at Newark that we've been seeing pop up basically every day this month. The FAA says this is part of a transition that they're in the process of making. They moved where Newark is controlled to the Philadelphia area. They say they built a pipeline to bring more staffing in, but right now we're just in a period where that pipeline hasn't caught up with the demand yet. And that's playing out today, as we've seen the last several days, resulting in hundreds of delayed flights at Newark, very few cancellations. And I think you've got to give some credit to the airlines for running operations that are robust enough with enough staffing to handle hundreds of delays and only result in a few cancellations.
Chris Van Cleve, I hope the 14-hour day for you and your crew ends soon. Thank you so much.
One more hit.
Good luck. A new Senate report reveals U.S. airlines made several billions of dollars from seating fees in recent years. A Senate subcommittee found 5 airlines, American, Delta, United, Frontier, and Spirit, have collected $12.4 billion from what the Biden administration considers junk fees related to seat assignments. These fees include seats that offer extra legroom and have what airlines consider preferred seating locations toward the front of the plane. The subcommittee has called on the executives to testify in front of the panel and address these fees next week. The incoming Trump administration is getting a head start on one of the president-elect's biggest campaign promises. Coming up, what Trump's so-called border czar is promising on his visit to the U.S. southern border and what it could signal about his first days in office. Plus, before handing over the reins, the Biden administration is hoping to push through a new rule to cover costly weight loss drugs and look at who could be covered and how much it would cost. You're watching The Daily Report.
Come on, Julia. Oh, no. I will if you will. You go, gal. That's right.
Let me see if you can find me.
I want to make sure that my voice is heard, but also that I lift up other voices.
You can't write a better script.
Yeah, boy! It's gonna be a ride.
We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
How fast do you think you were going? 195 miles an hour. This is incredible.
How close did you actually come to being killed?
That close.
Is this brain surgery without a knife?
It is.
What risk do these children pose to Russia?
I'm not sure the world is prepared for this change.
Definitely not.
Who's the best coach in college football today?
Let me see a mirror.
It's time for the CBS News original, 60 Minutes. Sundays on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. and reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun. But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I'm a voracious consumer of information and constantly curious. I want to know the basic facts of every issue and to press into the heart of the matter. Information is the currency of democracy, and that's what we bring to the table every Sunday.
When you need your sports news all the time,
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights
What a finish at the final round of play.
and in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap,
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone,
This could happen to anybody.
and sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
President-elect Trump's pick for border czar Tom Homan toured the U.S. southern border alongside Texas Governor Greg Abbott Tuesday. Homan was critical of the Biden administration's handling of the border and vowed to take action before the Trump administration takes over next year.
President Trump's going to come in January, like the governor says. We're not waiting until January. We're already talking. We're already planning. We're going to put a plan in place and secure this nation at the highest level it's ever seen.
Homan also reiterated the incoming administration's plans to carry out mass deportations of undocumented migrants in the U.S. CBS News correspondent Omar Villafranca is at the border in Eagle Pass, Texas. Omar, what do we know about the Trump administration's plans to secure the border, as Homan said during his visit today?
Well, of course, Lindsay, there's nothing concrete that we can point to, but we're basically going off what they have said in various interviews. And something that Homan said today is that day one, he wants things working to where the deportation plans start. He told the group here, which was DPS troopers and also state National Guards, that game on, and that day one there will be a mass deportation. Now, the details of that, that's where we're waiting to see how it's going to be carried out. One thing we have noticed in their language, though, there has been some nuance from the campaign trail to post-campaign. They are talking about, they're saying, violent criminal aliens who came in illegally. And he also said if there are migrants out there who have rulings on their cases that their cases for asylum here have been denied and they've been ordered to leave, those are also people that they want to remove from the country and deport them.
What is the symbolism of Homan's visit alongside Governor Abbott Tuesday?
Well, keep in mind, we are 50-plus days from the start of the Trump administration, January 20th. But something he said here is that we're not waiting until January 20th and then start planning. He said the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, wants to have plans on the ground so that when President Trump is sworn in, the wheels can get moving. They don't want to have to turn everything on and then start moving things. He says he wants things in place. He said he's already talking to Kristi Noem, and he's working with Governor Greg Abbott here to see what they can do to get things up and going. From visiting this area here in Eagle Pass to another place in Edinburgh, too, checking on possible detention facilities that they have that could possibly be used as staging areas for this mass deportation operation. So he wants to get things up and going here, even though it's 50-plus days since when the Trump administration will take power.
On Truth Social Monday, Trump mentioned a caravan in Mexico that he says seems to be unstoppable, making its way toward the U.S. What do we know?
Well, listen, President Trump, elect Trump will say stuff like this. There's always a caravan that's always sort of forming in southern Mexico. There was one a few weeks ago as well. And this is something that immigration observers and people here, we pay attention to. One thing that's been pointed to is there's credit given to Mexico's government. They have been actively working with the U.S. government and working to kind of diffuse those migrant caravans. They don't let them on buses. They don't let them on trains that would come up towards American soil, and they're kind of holding them back and pushing them back and dispersing them that way. Another thing we're also seeing is that President Biden's protocols that he put in place in June, where if too many people are crossing over, no one can claim asylum, that is also working as well, from what we're hearing from migrant groups here. Another thing that I'm hearing on the ground here in Texas, talking to some sheriff deputies here, they're starting to give credit to Operation Lone Star and saying that the show of force here to kind of deter people from coming in on certain areas may also be having a positive effect on keeping people back and keeping those numbers down. Because as you mentioned, and we've mentioned before in the past, the numbers of migrants coming over and crossing illegally and being apprehended is very, very low right now.
All right, Omar Villafranca, thank you.
Thank you.
The Biden administration is proposing a new rule that would have popular weight loss drugs like Ozempic covered by Medicare and Medicaid. Public health insurance programs already cover the medications for some people with diabetes. But this proposal would allow anyone considered obese, meaning a body mass index of 30 or higher, to also qualify for coverage. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, says 22% of Medicare recipients fall into that category. Without insurance coverage, these weight loss medications come with a notoriously high price, some costing $1,200 a month. CMS estimates the proposed rule would cost as much as $35 billion over the next 10 years. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joins me now. She's also the editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News. Doctor, these drugs have been in the news for months now. What is the idea behind this, allowing more insurance coverage so more people can essentially afford this medication?
So this is really a recognition, a formal recognition that obesity is a chronic medical condition, that taking these medications is not just about weight loss to look more attractive, et cetera, but really that it has an impact on your health. And what we are seeing is accumulating evidence that whether you're talking about diabetes or cardiovascular disease, stroke, kidney disease, dementia, different kinds of arthritis, we are seeing that these medications have a really beneficial impact for people who have obesity.
Well, as you know, President-elect Trump has picked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to lead the Department of Health and Human Services, which encompasses the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, among other agencies. Kennedy was on Fox News in October. He was asked about a similar bill to this proposal that would have covered weight loss drugs. Let's go ahead and listen.
That alone will cost $3 trillion a year. If we spent about 1/5 of that giving good food, 3 meals a day to every man, woman, and child in our country, we could solve the obesity and diabetes epidemic overnight. A tiny fraction of the cost.
What is your reaction to that? Is it that simple?
Well, look, the GLP-1 drugs, these weight loss drugs, they're not the silver bullet. Clearly, diet and exercise has not been the silver bullet either. I would talk about it as being silver buckshot. We need a lot of different solutions to chip away at this. The Biden administration, the FDA, has sent to the White House proposed guidelines for front-of-package food labeling to make it much more clear to consumers, hey, this food is healthy or not healthy. It's really hard sometimes to read the fine print and figure out what all of that really means. We were waiting to see if the White House signs off on that. But that would be another strategy for addressing the obesity problem from another perspective. We also know that the incoming administration has Medicare and Medicaid in the crosshairs for budget cuts. And so something, a rule like this that would, with respect to the weight loss drugs, that would increase spending by Medicare and Medicaid really don't seem very consistent with those plans to cut the budget.
So you think it's probable that when the next administration comes in, it would get rolled back? I mean, you understand sort of these public health rulemaking better than anyone. How long would something like this take in order to come into effect? Will anyone even feel the effects before the next administration comes in?
So with respect to the weight loss drugs, the Trump administration would have to finalize that. So that would not be until after inauguration, based on the current timeline. With respect to the FDA food package labeling, assuming the White House signs off, then you would have to open that up for public comment. And again, it would be the Trump administration that would finally act on that. So first of all, we're talking about months to years in some cases with Medicare and the weight loss drugs. We're talking about 2026 at the earliest.
Okay.
But, you know, even so, a lot of this will just depend on how the politics play out in the incoming administration.
Okay, Dr. Celine Gounder, thank you. Coming up, Planned Parenthood is preparing for a funding fight, what an incoming Trump administration could mean for the organization, and what losing funding could mean for the Americans that rely on its care. You're watching The Daily Report.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows.
We need to step up and help them.
And a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Oh, wow. Look at this.
Let 60 Minutes take you on a private tour of the National Archives.
So there may be treasures like this buried in boxes.
Historical secrets from America's past.
This is original from 1778?
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places. Bright, shiny faces.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Put me in the game, coach.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
The best interviews feel like it's just a conversation with a neighbor.
Hey.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask a question that is the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Here we go.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I'll see you in the morning.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
The grief of losing a child is immense. You can't breathe.
After decades of the war on drugs, things have only gotten worse.
Every shipment of fentanyl is a ticking time bomb.
50 times more powerful than heroin.
CBS Reports goes deep into Mexico.
What is your role in the Sinaloa cartel?
To find out why the cartels keep getting stronger and wealthier.
This is a war, but we're not fighting it. Our citizens are dying.
Funding Cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm Lindsay Reiser. Here are some additions to our top stories. California health officials say the bird flu virus has been detected in a raw milk sample. It was detected during routine screening earlier this month. Raw Farms, the company where the milk came from, has issued a voluntary recall of the product. The news comes days after the bird flu was detected in a child in California, the first ever case in a minor in the U.S. U.S. health officials announced a new rule that will allow people with HIV in need of a liver or kidney transplant to receive an organ from someone who is also HIV positive. This used to be something that was only done for research purposes. Officials hope by increasing the donor pool, there will be a decrease in wait times for organ transplants. The rule goes into effect Wednesday. Prices for single-family houses in the U.S. rose for the month of September as affordability gets harder for prospective homeowners. Data from the Federal Housing Finance Agency shows prices increased nearly 4.4% from the year prior. Meanwhile, the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate has also increased. It currently sits just below 7%, up from nearly 6% in September. NATO held emergency talks with Ukraine Tuesday. The meeting was called after Russia hit the central Ukrainian city of Dnipro last week with an experimental ballistic missile. Russian President Vladimir Putin claimed Western anti-missile systems are incapable of intercepting this new type of weapon. A NATO spokesperson says the military alliance reaffirmed its support for Ukraine during the talks and that the Dnipro strike would not alter the course of the war. At a separate meeting with the Prime Minister of Greece, NATO's Secretary General said more should be done to aid Ukraine.
Our support for Ukraine has kept them in the fight. But we need to go further to change the trajectory of the conflict. We need to provide critical air defenses and deliver on the commitments made at the NATO summit in Washington.
Ivo Dalder joins us now. He is the former U.S. ambassador to NATO. Thank you so much for being here. What options does NATO have to respond to Russia without escalating the conflict?
Well, it has a most important option is to continue to do what it's doing, which is to send as many weapons as it can, as quickly as it can to Ukraine, and to support Ukraine, not just this month, not just next month, but really for as long as it takes for Ukraine to be able to defend the territory that the Russians are attacking. I'm not particularly worried about the prospect of real escalation because of what the Russians have been doing. The Russians are trying to rattle our cages, and this is a time when, as I think NATO said today at the meeting, it's time to bear down, be steadfast, and continue to support Ukraine.
Let's talk about the rattling of the cage, because NATO says Russia using this new type of missile won't change the course of the conflict. But according to Putin, these missiles fly at 10 times the speed of sound. How could that not change the conflict?
Well, one, they don't have a lot of them. Two, they really only have an impact when they are armed by nuclear weapons, not by the conventional weapons that this one missile seemed to have had. And that would really change the nature of the conflict. The use of a nuclear weapon has not happened since 1945. The use of a nuclear weapon against a country that is supported by other nuclear weapons countries has never happened before. So before that happens, Vladimir Putin would have to think very seriously about the consequences. But as a conventional missile, yes, it can do damage. But, you know, there were 180 or so drones being shot just overnight by the Russians against Ukraine, 25,000 missiles and drones since the beginning of the war. One more missile that happens to go very fast is not going to make a fundamental difference.
Well, Trump says he would end the war in 24 hours. He hasn't said how, but could these recent developments be an effort by either Ukraine or Russia to sort of maximize their bargaining positions before Trump comes into office?
Yeah, I do think that particularly on the Russian side, you're seeing an attempt to gain as much territory, and they actually are gaining quite a bit of territory compared to what was the case for the last few months. But they're doing so at an incredible cost. We now know it's about 1,500 dead and wounded a day that the Russians are losing. That's about 45,000 a month. Those are extraordinary numbers of casualties. Yes, the Ukrainians are also suffering casualties, but the square kilometers that the Russians are gaining in territory, which looks like they are trying to gain before the inauguration of President Trump, is coming at a cost that is really, truly extraordinary.
If the U.S. stops sending money to Ukraine under Trump, would NATO be forced to reevaluate its position on aid for Ukraine?
Well, the aid that is being provided today is provided by nations, not by NATO as such. So if the United States decided no longer to send aid, then European members of NATO would have to consider whether they could fill the gap. And the answer to that is yes when it comes to monetary terms, but probably no when it comes to actual weapons. There just aren't enough weapons that the Europeans have in their stockpiles that can be sent. But what I think will happen is a continuing support for Ukraine, including for the Ukrainian defense industry, with more and more money being transferred to the Ukrainians to increase its own capabilities. That said, there's no doubt that if the United States cut off further aid to Ukraine, that will have a major impact on Ukraine's ability to defend itself against this brutal attack.
Ambassador Ivo Dalder, we really appreciate your expertise. We hope you'll come back.
My pleasure.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are laying out their plan to cut federal spending under the newly established and unofficial Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. In a co-written op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, the pair wrote in part, DOGE will help end federal overspending by taking aim at the $500 billion plus in annual federal expenditures. They went on to say that includes, quote, nearly $300 million to progressive groups like Planned Parenthood. In response, Planned Parenthood tried to highlight Just how many patients would be affected if they lost funding? Take a look at your screen. The organization pointed to its appointments the day the 2024 election was called. Planned Parenthood centers say they saw vasectomy appointments increase by 1,200%, IUD appointments increased by 760%, and gender-affirming care appointments increased by 140%. Oriana Gonzalez joins us now. She's a reporter covering reproductive health for Notice. Oriana, thank you for being here. This is not the first time Republicans have called for the federal defunding of Planned Parenthood. Walk us through the history here.
Yeah, so Mike Pence in 2007, he was then a congressman, introduced for the first time legislation to quote unquote defund Planned Parenthood. At the time, that was seen as incredibly controversial, but now what I'm hearing from Republicans in Congress is that there seems to be more consensus, a little bit more of an agreement in terms of now that there's a GOP trifecta, that they could try and seek a bill or a legislation to codify defunding Planned Parenthood into law.
Well, federal spending is typically controlled by Congress. Would Trump's DOGE department have the power to do anything? And if so, would it be immediate? What would the process look like?
So DOGE, exactly as you're saying, DOGE is a presidential advisory commission. So itself, that department, what it can do is advise the president, give research to the president as to what to do. And so what DOGE has said is that they don't support federal funding for Planned Parenthood, which is not a new position for Trump. We saw him completely oppose federal funding for Planned Parenthood in the first administration. He had a rule to lead to cuts for Planned Parenthood, and I expect to see the same thing this time around in his second administration.
So while it receives federal funding, Planned Parenthood also accepts donations and has a lot of big groups supporting it. Would that be enough to offset the funding loss from the government?
So we know that federal funding that Planned Parenthood gets amounts to around 34% of their entire revenue. This is according to their annual report that they released this past year. And so, again, it's not even half of the revenue that they get, but the question isn't necessarily just will Planned Parenthood stay afloat and will these donations make up for it? It's what happens to those patients, those Medicaid reimbursements, Title X grant money that they got. What happens to the low-income patients that were going to Planned Parenthood to access reproductive health care services that maybe they couldn't get somewhere else? That's where the federal funding cuts could have a lot of impact.
I want to ask you more about that. What would be the overall health impact of defunding Planned Parenthood, given these clinics provide more services than just abortion care?
Totally. So we have to remember that, Planned Parenthood doesn't get a blank check from the government saying, here's your federal funding. It gets most of it through Medicaid reimbursements and through, again, Title X grants. What happens here is that those patients that were going to Planned Parenthood, people that are on Medicaid, which amounts to more than half of the patients that Planned Parenthood sees, were going there for STI testing and treatment. We're going there for cancer screenings, primary care services. So really, those are the services that are impacted. What happens to those services and how can those patients access them in lieu of Planned Parenthood not being able to offer them to those patients that can afford it themselves? That's what we'll see in the next administration exactly, and whether they actually succeed in, quote unquote, again, defunding Planned Parenthood.
Okay. Oriana Gonzalez, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come, a pandemic program meant to help American businesses is now putting some of them in debt. We'll explain. You're watching The Daily Report.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off.
that kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
I can see clearly now.
Clearly, CBS Mornings.
Weekdays on CBS.
Yeah!
Tony, coming?
No, I'm going to stick around for an hour.
CBS Mornings Plus with Adriana Diaz and Tony DeCopel, right after CBS Mornings.
It's just like mornings.
Plus fun.
Oh, yeah, it's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day.
These 7 miles of tunnels were the secret storage site for fuel for the Navy's Pacific Fleet in planes.
So this is one of the tanks.
Oh my gosh.
What happened 20 stories below ground is a story for 60 Minutes.
This thing that was a lifeline for the fleet is a threat.
That's right.
I'm Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours, and of all the cases I've covered, this is the one that troubles me most. Listen to Murder in the Orange Grove, the troubled case against Crosley Green, wherever you get your podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Sunday morning, a visit with the Wayans at Papa's house, plus affairs of state with the diplomat, and in praise of pigeons. Listen for the trumpet.
In 2020, the Federal Reserve established the Main Street Lending Program as a way to support mid-sized businesses during the pandemic. Now, some of those businesses are having trouble catching up with those loan repayments. Bloomberg reports that the loans ranging from $100,000 to $300 million were offered to, quote, help businesses that were generally too big to apply for forgivable loans through the Paycheck Protection Program and too small to tap U.S. capital markets. The central bank recently reported that while most of the $17.5 billion in loans have been paid off, as of October, more than $1 billion in interest and principal payments are in default, meaning significantly overdue. For more, let's bring in Katerina Saraiva. She's an economics and Federal Reserve reporter for Bloomberg News. Katerina, how did this happen? What are businesses telling you about why they're defaulting?
Yeah, I think overall, it's just a really tough environment. There's a few different factors at play. I mean, one is that the economy today is very different from what we imagined it would be back in the early days of the pandemic. And then importantly, also, the way this program was set up is now kind of burdening a lot of businesses. These loans were set up as floating rate. And of course, we've had a big run up in interest rates. So that interest rate burden has really increased and is really weighing on businesses. And then you also have the way that the payments are structured on the principal amount of the loan. They're structured as bullet payments, just 3 of them. And the last one, which for most of these businesses is going to come due next year, is 70% of the principal. It's a large number.
Well, the pandemic changed a lot about how people live and where people work and shop. How does that factor into the issues these borrowers are having?
Yeah, I think it's been a significant issue for a lot of the businesses. I mean, one of the companies we talked to was World of Beer. This is a chain of craft breweries, bar restaurant type of a place across the U.S. And, with their Main Street loan, they opened a few different locations, but one of the locations was in kind of the bottom of an office building near Washington, D.C., with the assumption that, after work, once people return to the office, coworkers would want to grab a beer. And of course, we haven't seen return to office nearly as robustly as everyone thought it would be, in the spring of 2020. So there's, at the time when these loans were being made, we were making a lot of assumptions about the economy post-COVID that, of course, are different now.
Yeah, some things we thought would stay all the time, like masking and not having buffets and crews, and look at where we are today. So much has happened that we didn't necessarily expect. You know, is $1 billion sort of a drop in the bucket? Is the bigger impact on these businesses, or is it sort of on the Fed and the central bank?
Yeah, I think the bigger impact is on the individual businesses. I mean, these are mid-sized businesses, so they're not tiny, but they're also not huge, and they often don't have a lot of recourse, right? They can't go to capital markets like a really big corporation could. And in a lot of cases, they're having trouble restructuring this debt. It's the terms on these loans are make it very difficult for that to happen. And for the Fed, I mean, the reality is that the interest payments that they've received so far from the loan payments that have come in are offsetting this. And there's also money that was appropriated through the CARES Act that acts as a backstop. So they likely won't really have actual, losses when all is said and done on this. But I think it's important as kind of a case study as we look ahead to future crises and what kind of policies we might want to put in place the next time we have a downturn.
I got to be quick with you on this, but what do you mean by that?
Well, will we want to deploy something like this again? And, the answer, the lesson we may have learned this time around is maybe not.
Katerina Saraiva, thank you so much for your reporting and for coming on and sharing it with us.
Thank you.
Well, you'll likely hear this question a lot in the coming days. What are you most thankful for? Turns out the answer is something most Americans can actually agree on. You're watching The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now. We got something crazy.
And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Nations are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's gonna be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift, stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
In 112 years of life, the world's oldest man lived through 2 world wars and 2 global pandemics. That man, an Englishman named John Tinniswood, died this week. He was born in 1912, the same year the Titanic sank. During his lifetime, he served in the Royal Army Pay Corps, got married, had a daughter, 4 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. After being recognized as the world's oldest man in April, Tinniswood insisted his longevity was just luck. This Thanksgiving will likely be many Americans' first big family gathering since the election. According to a CBS News poll, no matter who you voted for, the majority of Americans say they will try to avoid talking politics during the holiday. But if we can't agree on politics, turns out Americans still largely agree on some things, including what they're most thankful for. Topping the list, family and friends, followed closely by health. Matters of politics and government ranked at the bottom. Seems like most people don't like pairing politics with their poultry. Can't blame them. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. A ceasefire deal is reached between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah militants. What's in the agreement and how the U.S. helped broker it. Plus, President-elect Donald Trump is vowing to slap sweeping tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China when he takes office. How much he's proposing and the potential impacts on consumers. And this Thanksgiving travel week could be one for the record books. We'll check in on how airports and airlines are handling the rush. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
CBS Mornings Plus, clearly more news, more smart conversation.
More money-saving tips, more recipes.
More uplifting ways to get you on your way.
Plus, more sports, more weather.
Clearly, more CBS Mornings.
Plus,
sunshiny day.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
I have a dorky look to me. I don't look like a criminal at all.
60 Minutes has reported on fraudsters, criminals, and hoodlums. But what this minor league thief was able to do surprised even us.
These are Yogi Berra's World Series rings.
A sports story you'll have to see to believe.
Need more time with 48 Hours? Go deep behind every true crime episode with first-hand accounts from 48 Hours Investigations.
Were you at all prepared for what happened in this case?
Shock is the word that comes to mind.
Get inside the twists and turns and get in on the case. Listen to Postmortem from 48 Hours, now available wherever you get your podcasts.
I think we're very cute.
Yeah, I think we need to send out a Christmas card like this.
Yeah, let's do that.
Dollar Jill.
If you can't get into the market, it's okay. Renting is fine.
I wonder how Serena is feeling.
That's a really good question. no one's asked me that yet.
You're 70 years old?
70, yeah.
I'm 21.
We'll see you 7 o'clock sharp.
Sunday morning, the Music Man, T-Bone Burnett, plus Ted Danson, and Martha Stewart with Just the Recipe. Listen for the trumpet.
I report from a lot of war zones, but I don't really take the same risks.
He's one of the bravest war correspondents 60 Minutes has ever met. But it's his relationship with his mother that you will remember. Plus, the robots making marble masterpieces in Italy.
As a kid growing up in Chicago, there was one horror movie I was too scared to watch. It was called Candyman. But did you know that the movie Candyman was partly inspired by an actual murder? Listen to Candyman, the true story behind the bathroom mirror murder, wherever you get your podcasts.
The CBS News original 60 Minutes opens its archives.
Pretty loose for a Friday night.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not my first show.
With moments you haven't